Hi everyone, thank you so much for tuning in for another video. As some of you guys may remember, I worked on some pouch designs back in October of last year, and they are finally here in my hands and I can't wait to share with you guys. So I hope you enjoy the video where I'll be sharing with you how I came up with the designs, and at the very end I'll show you guys how they turned out. I was really excited to start sketching for the pouches since it's a three-dimensional product and it has a front and a back, so I really wanted to play with that instead of repeating the same design for both sides. And I came up with this clown idea, and it is the clown having a birthday party with his dog, and apparently no one showed up to the party, so they are very sad and lonely. And I really liked this idea from very early on, so I decided to just commit to it and go with it, and I just drew it over and over again to get the composition right. And at the same time, I was sketching out the ideas for the second pouch designs. And in this one, I really wanted to use my gnome characters. They are these characters that I draw with the pointy gnome hats. And there's three of them. There's the girl, the boy, and the cat. And I play with the idea of the girl tossing hearts, and on the back side would be the boy kind of picking up the hearts that are being thrown, and the cat is kind of trampling on the hearts. I thought it'd be kind of a cute idea, but for some reason I felt like I wanted a pose that wasn't too actiony. I wanted it to be kind of a very stationary pose for some reason. So I did another sketch where I just have the girl, the boy kind of far apart, and they are coyly eyeing each other, and there's the cat in the middle kind of being like, what? And then on the back side would be the girl and boy standing now together with a big heart in the back, and the cat is not pleased and he is trying to cut the heart. I'm just throwing down whatever comes to mind on paper, and I didn't love this idea, and I decided that I don't really want the boy character on the pouch. I think I wanted to keep it just the girl and the cat character, so I did more sketches with just the two characters, but I really liked the heart idea, so I was trying to incorporate that, and somehow I ended up with this one where I really liked the pose of the girl really tightly hugging the cat, and then there's a big heart in the back, and I felt that the big heart really helped to fill out the composition of the pouch. So I decided to carry that over onto the back side, and this time have just their big heads looking at each other with a big bow in the middle. And that's it. That's how I came up with the ideas for these pouches. But I did then take these designs, these rough drawings, into Photoshop to fine-tune a lot of things and to finalize the drawing so that everything is where I want it, no line is out of place, and this is how the final drawings looked when they were ready to be transferred for painting. But before I begin the painting, as always, I like to start out by doing a rough color pass. And it was a great practice run for me because I'm really not used to painting in this kind of style with gouache. I wouldn't really know how to even describe the style. I'm sure there is some kind of a name for it, but in my head I think of Mary Blair, I think of the illustrations in the little golden books, and I think of really vintage greeting card illustrations. And how I would describe the style is that it is vintage. It's from the 50s and 60s, kind of that era of illustrations. It has a painterly feeling to it because it doesn't use a lot of outlines, but at the same time it is very graphic because there's not a ton of rendering, and it's very shape based. So that's the kind of painting style that I wanted to emulate with my designs for my pouches. And I don't think I've ever actually painted in this way before until now. So there was definitely a bit of a learning curve. So doing these little practice runs before I do the final painting really helped. And by the time I got to the clown ones, I actually really liked how the roughs came out, and I almost contemplated just using what I had on the roughs in the final, but decided against it. And in the end, I'm glad I did, but I really do like how these roughs turned out, and I feel like I was a little bit looser in the rough, so it actually has a bit more of that painterly feel I was going for. And in terms of color, I really wanted to keep it to a very limited palette, and I wanted the two pouches to have very different palettes because I didn't want them to look too similar to each other. So for the cat pouch, I was envisioning a warm palette with lots of pink, and I was also referencing off of the character's typical color palette. And for the clown pouch, I decided to go with blue because that is very different from pink, and I wanted to throw a lot of bright red accents in there because for me, bright red against another bright color kind of screams circus and clowns. So that's what I based my colors around for the clown pouch. So by this point, I had familiarized myself with how to go about painting in this sort of a style, and I was happy with the colors that I had picked, so I was ready to start painting. So while you're seeing me paint the final thing, I'll try to talk a little bit more in depth about what I did to achieve this specific painting style. First, when I transferred the image to the painting surface, I made sure that the pencil lines would show up a little bit stronger than I would normally do on other paintings. And that's because I will be covering up the lines with paint anyway, so because it won't show through, it doesn't really matter. And it also helps me actually when it is stronger because I don't start out with doing the outlines first. I start out doing the opposite first. So the pencil lines can get a little bit lost and it's hard for me to see where I'm going. So I made sure that they would be pretty strong to begin with so it would guide me along and I wouldn't get lost. So as you can see, I'm basically approaching this kind of like a coloring book where I'm just filling in the sections with the local color. And painting in this way is really, really tough for me because I feel like it sits at the ugly stage for a really, really long time. But once everything is pretty much filled in, then I can go in with the outlines, which ties everything together. And using gouache is really all about getting the right consistency of mixture between the pigment and enough water. And it really was tough because I think my gouache paints are quite old and they're probably pretty dry. Even when I do mix it to a great consistency, by the next time that I dip my brush in, it's already like dried up again. So I have a feeling that maybe my gouache paints are getting a little bit old, so I probably should replace them. And in fact, during Boxing Week over the holidays, I actually bought a few new gouache paints to replace the worst offenders of my palette. So hopefully it will be a little bit easier for me the next time around. And because I'm doing the outline in paint and the outline is going to, over time, become mixed into the rest of the painting, I wanted it to be a predominantly warm color because I feel like a warm color just looks more appealing as an outline as opposed to a cool color. So once I was ready to, I went in with the outlines and boy, did it help me like it so much more once the outlines were in place. The whole time I was painting these, I was just waiting until the point that I could throw in the outlines because it was a little painful to stay in the ugly stage for so long. And in the painting process, you kind of need those little bits of gratification, little affirmations that the painting is good and that it's not a total waste of time and that you can keep on going. It's funny because I used gouache so that the outlines would kind of meld in with the rest of the painting so that it would have that painterly look, as opposed to having done it on Photoshop and having really clean and distinct outlines. Not to say that you can't make it look painterly on Photoshop, which you definitely can, but I used gouache because I really was going after that 50s, 60s illustration look, because I know a lot of those illustrators used gouache. I have no idea how they did their paintings, and to this day I still, it amazes me what they were able to do, but really this was my first attempt at emulating that style. I could have done these elements digitally along with the background and the heart, but I wanted them to have the same textural feel as the characters, and I was afraid that I wouldn't be able to quite match the style perfectly if I had done it on Photoshop. But had I done it on Photoshop, I probably could have done it a lot faster. And here's how the paintings for the cat pouch design turned out. I was always scared of doing designs that were very graphic, and that's because I'm not a very graphically oriented person. I don't really think in lines, and it's very challenging for me to design graphically. But for some reason, I've been opening up to them a little bit and trying to incorporate these more graphic elements into my work. By the time I got to the clown designs, I was feeling a lot more confident, and I think my gouache mixing ability had improved, so it definitely went over a lot smoother. And same as last time, I started out by laying the skin down first. And one thing I wanted to mention with the skin, I actually, instead of leaving a flat wash, I will try and mix a pink tone for the cheeks, and I lay it down while the paint is still wet in hopes that the pink color will kind of blend in a gradient around the skin tone. Achieving a very smooth gradient with gouache is difficult already, and I really didn't want to go over the skin tone again and again, because I know from experience that doing that will cause it to be very uneven and patchy and not be the tone that I initially started out with. So that's why I used a little bit of the wet on wet technique just for the cheeks. Gouache can be really deceiving in the way that it dries. Sometimes it looks a lot patchier once it goes down, but after a while you'll find that it actually dries quite smoothly. So it's kind of a funny waiting game with gouache. You don't necessarily want to jump the gun with every seeming mistake. You kind of have to wait it out a little bit and see what happens once it really has dried. There's just been too many times where I did jump the gun and try to fix what seemed to be a mistake and then regretted it later on when I noticed that, it actually wasn't that patchy. And in fact, by going in again with more paint, it ends up disturbing the layers underneath and around it, which forces you to go over the entire thing all over again to fix that. So I think patience is definitely an important virtue when painting with gouache. For the most part, these designs were treated very graphically, where it's just a solid patch of color with an outline, but I did render out a few little areas that I felt kind of gave the picture a little bit more interest. I rendered the boy and dog's ears because I felt like it gave the picture a little bit more depth, and also their cheeks because I think it's really cute that they have puffy cheeks. You'll notice, especially with these clown designs, when I'm doing the outlines, the color of the outline isn't always a uniformly dark brown color. For example, when I would outline something that is very light in value, I didn't necessarily want a very dark brown right up against it because that would create a little bit too much contrast, and I don't want the outlines to really pop out too much. So I didn't necessarily use a uniformly dark brown color to outline everything. Some areas are outlined with a dark turquoise. Some areas are outlined with a dark orange. And I feel like breaking up the color of the outline really helped bring a little bit more of an interest to the piece. And I do think that this really contributes to that painterly feel because the outlines then play with the rest of the piece rather than just sitting on top of the piece, kind of like how it looks in a coloring book, because in a coloring book you're just filling in the colors within the lines. The lines and the colors aren't really playing together. The lines just kind of sit on top of the colors. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but that just wasn't the aesthetic that I was after. And you'll even notice that I didn't outline everything. Some elements I felt like they were clear enough that they didn't need to be outlined. So with that, the paintings were finished, but that was definitely not the end of the designing process for these pouches, because I then had to scan them in, take them into Photoshop, and clean them up and create the background and lay it all out in the template that we were given. And unfortunately for my viewers, I did not record this part of the process. I feel like if I had though, it would have probably slowed everything down by a lot because it was surprisingly a really tedious process that took just as long as the painting did. So I'll save you guys from that, but here's how the designs looked once I put the background elements together with the paintings that I did. And once I was happy with everything, I sent these off to the manufacturer, or in my case, the person that was organizing the group order. And a few months later, I am holding these pouches in my hands. I'm really happy with how they came out, and I'm kind of mesmerized every time I look at them. Like, I made this. And I love how it feels in my hands. It's a nice plush kind of pleather material. It's got an inner lining with an additional zipper pocket, which is really handy, and it just feels really nice and sturdy. So overall, I'm really pleased with how they came out. If you like them too, you can grab one at my online shop. Link is down below in the description. That said, I will be making other products like this in the near future. In fact, I spent the entire last month figuring out how to make and organize the manufacturing of other products like washi tape and enamel pins. So definitely more things like this in store in the near future. So I hope you guys will be excited for that as well. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye!